Hey everyone! Tonight we are diving into the intriguingly strange realm of ancient Roman street snacks. From greasy food stalls known as thermopolia to sweet fig cakes drenched in honey and enjoyed under the shade of marble columns, Roman fast food was much more than mere sustenance. It represented taste, social standing, and survival, all blended into one enigmatic delicacy. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly appreciate the content I create here. Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. It is always captivating to discover who joins our journey from different parts of the world. Now, lower the lights, perhaps switch on a fan to provide a gentle background breeze, and let us ease into this evening's adventure together. Picture yourself wandering down a sun-drenched Roman street, your worn sandals carrying you along, your tunic sticking uncomfortably in all the wrong spots. You are nursing a headache caused by drinking no fewer than 5 cups of diluted wine and making questionable choices at the bathhouse. You are certainly not in the mood for a formal feast or an intellectual discussion about olive varieties with your neighbor. Instead, you crave something quick, oily, and maybe a little regrettable. Something that won't demand much thought and won't mind if you eat it with one hand while using the other to shoo away bothersome pigeons. Enter the thermopolium, the Roman version of a lively street food stand, almost like an ancient Taco Bell with grander marble counters and fewer menu options. Food regulations appear straightforward at first glance. Stone countertops feature round cavities carved into them, each housing a dolia, which are large earthenware vessels filled with whatever hot edible items survived the morning. No menus or labels are present, and no clear structure governs the choices, just a lively mixture of options, both literal and digestive. What can you find here? Fried cheese balls that make a squeaking sound when bitten into, doubtful sausage links that could be pork, or just hopeful guesses. A mysterious stew that might contain lentils, or only seem to do so. And lingering over everything is garum, the Roman fermented fish sauce that acts as both seasoning and experimental social binder. Cleanliness is questionable at best. The cook wears the same tunic he slept in, and the spoon he uses has probably witnessed at least 2 Civil War phases. Yet the food arrives hot, salty, and packed with enough energy to help you survive another afternoon battling the crowd. Thermopolia were widespread, particularly in Pompeii, where almost every block featured one. Workers, scholars, wandering poets, and baffled tourists from Gaul gathered at these stalls, exchanging coins for food that was fast, filling, and somewhat illegal. Sure, it might cause stomach issues later, but when the alternative is a cold onion or whatever is bubbling at the corner stall, you trust your instincts and hope your digestion forgives you. After all, you leave the thermopolium having found sustenance for the journey ahead. Your pride is slightly wounded, and there is a small stain spreading across your toga. You are strolling through the forum once again, and your stomach emits that familiar, ominous rumble. You do not need a full meal right now, only a quick bite to munch on while you pretend to pay attention to a public speaker endlessly lecturing about grain subsidies. Enter roasted chickpeas, known in ancient Roman streets as Cicer arietinum, which sounds impressive, but essentially means small stones masquerading as food. Vendors offered them in clay dishes or tiny cloth bags, vociferously competing in a vibrant chorus of hawking their goods: warm chickpeas, crispy chickpeas, chickpeas that might chip your teeth. These were roasted on open flames until their texture landed somewhere between brittle and gravelly. A generous amount of salt was added, since salt was the Romans' universal solution for preservation, flavor enhancement, and masking unpleasant tastes. Despite this, chickpeas were incredibly popular. Soldiers nibbled them during long marches, senators munched between political dealings, and children chewed them as if training for adulthood. They were affordable, satiating, and resistant to spoiling, making them perfect for slipping into a bag, a lunch container, or even launching at someone during a gladiator contest. The selection was quite simple. There was no chili lime seasoning or creamy hummus to dip into, only a bowl of hardened legumes dusted in salt, and sometimes served warm, a rare treat. Naturally, the Romans claimed these little snacks were good for your health. Chickpeas were believed to enhance virility, aid digestion, and inspire profound reflections, which sounds like something a chickpea seller might have invented. But if it helped sell the product, why not? Occasionally you would find a tender one, slightly chewy and a bit floury, and for a fleeting moment you might think, this is not so bad. Then you would try another and recall that Roman dentistry was still nearly a millennium away from fixing this issue. Nevertheless, for a few coins, you received a snack that traveled easily, lasted indefinitely, and kept your mouth busy during lengthy political addresses. In Roman times, that was worth every cracked tooth. Now, your appetite craves something different, possibly sweet, perhaps soft, maybe less existentially crunchy. You notice a vendor carrying a tray of shining golden orbs sparkling under the sun. You approach with caution, because in Rome, sweet treats are often misleading. He hands you one with a sly smile and says globally, "What are these?" Imagine deep-fried cheese balls, drenched in honey. This is no medieval fair fantasy. Globuli were an authentic Roman dessert, made by blending ricotta-like cheese with flour, shaping the mixture into balls, frying them deep in oil, and then soaking them generously in honey as if they were guilty of excessive indulgence. They combined sweetness with savoriness and were structurally delicate. Bite too quickly, and hot cheese would shoot out in the opposite direction. The honey would glue your fingers pressed together, ensuring the rest of your day did not involve bees, dogs, or awkward hand movements toward passing senators. Yet, make no mistake, globuli were tremendously popular. The recipe is found in Apicius, often considered the closest equivalent Romans had to a cookbook. These treats were reserved for dinner parties, temple celebrations, and impressing anyone you wished to charm with sweetness. The texture? Imagine something unexpected, crispy on the outside with molten flowing cheese within. The flavor lay somewhere between a dessert and the notion of cheesecake turned bold. The Romans never believed in limiting their use of honey. These delights were essentially like candied cannonballs. Though they were not street fare accessible to all, deep-frying cheese in oil required considerable effort, making them more common at upscale social events. Picture a toga gathering concluding with guests sighing contentedly, their clothing marked by cheese oil, and bees buzzing around like tiny attendants. One bite could whisk you away to gastronomic bliss or have you rushing to the nearest fountain to rinse your fingers. There was no middle ground, so yes, while today we have donuts, churros, and fried Oreos, the Romans enjoyed globuli. In some ways, they outpaced us. Deep-frying dairy and coating it in sugar was not a novel idea, but rather a rediscovery. You only needed to endure the stickiness. Craving something more polished, less messy, and perhaps elegant? Here comes the Roman answer to gourmet sweets. Dates filled with nuts, referred to as dulia domestica in recipes from Aius, were deceptively straightforward little treats. Begin with fresh dates, sticky, brown, and soft, almost like a thick jam. After removing the pits, pack them generously with finely chopped almonds or walnuts. Then add honey in various ways, lightly drizzled, rolled in, or completely soaked, depending on one's social standing and fondness for bold flavors. At first, these sweets appear innocent, a humble rustic delight that you might proudly offer your grandmother. Yet caution is necessary because these confections were heavy, densely compacted, rich in flavor, and if left too long under the sun, they became tough enough to risk damaging teeth. These treats were not exclusive to nobles, though the wealthy certainly displayed them ostentatiously at banquets. Slaves and laborers occasionally enjoyed dried dates as well, especially during festivals when indulgence was briefly tolerated, and digestive troubles were quietly overlooked. The texture was nothing if not energetic. The dates offered a chewy resistance, the nuts contributed a sharp crunch, and the honey worked like ancient Roman glue. Consuming one demanded effort and perhaps some privacy, because they clung stubbornly to teeth, fingers, togas, and sometimes even strained personal relationships when someone took the last piece. Nutritionally, they packed a punch. Dates provided high sugar and energy, nuts offered protein, and honey added its own sweet benefits. Honey truly elevated everything to a new level of elegance. The Romans believed it helped with digestion, but honestly, they were mostly excited to enjoy something sweet that did not contain any bones. Additionally, these delicacies were easy to transport, making them ideal as gifts, offerings, or even spontaneous apologies. Soldiers brought them into battle, lovers exchanged them like edible messages of affection, and when tensions rose, they served as throwable items with enough weight to make a statement. In an empire that dominated the known world, this dessert was incredibly popular, sticky, gratifying, and occasionally hazardous. Now, let's veer sharply into the realm of the bizarre, because if there is one Roman snack that still causes shock today, it has to be this one, stuffed dormice. Yes, tiny furry creatures with large eyes and an unfortunate fate of appearing on high-status Roman dining tables. Consider it the original clash between culinary delight and ethical discomfort. To be fair, not everyone indulged in these glorified rodents. This was mainly a delicacy for the wealthy elite. Common people ate more humble fare like lentils and boiled onions. But if you belonged to the Roman aristocracy, the toga-wearing, poetry-reciting, villa-owning crowd, serving dormice to guests was absolutely mandatory, not out of necessity, but because, well, it was a matter of prestige. These dormice were raised in small terracotta containers known as glaria, which functioned like a mouse-sized gym with no escape. The aim was to fatten them up efficiently. They were plump and inviting before being filled with minced pork, herbs, and nuts. After that, they were either roasted, coated in honey, or even both, because why limit yourself to just one culinary adventure when you can embrace several? Guests would pick them up carefully as though trying not to notice the tail still attached. The taste was often described as nutty, though that is probably the kind of phrase people use to appear sophisticated. In reality, it most likely had the flavor of greasy rodent and poor choices. What's surprising is that this practice wasn't even illegal. In fact, the farming of dormice was officially regulated, which shows how common it was. The Romans wrote about dormice, joked about them, and even depicted them in elaborate mosaics as if to say, "Here rests a wealthy man who owned mice." What makes this all really fascinating is that despite how strange it sounds, dormice were considered exquisite delicacies, much like the caviar of the Roman Empire, extravagant, debatable, and somewhat morally complex. So why eat them? Simply because they could, to impress guests, and because moderation in cuisine wasn't really appreciated when you ruled across the Mediterranean. To modern ears, it sounds horrifying, but to them it was just an elegant finger food with flair. In a society where even flamingo tongues were a regular dish, a crispy, honey-glazed dormouse was almost mundane. Naturally, you deserve something comforting, something golden, and something that doesn't stare back at you. Enter the honey cake, or, as the Romans called it, libum. Now, to begin. To be clear, these were not the light and fluffy sponge cakes of today. No one was sharing pictures of these on social media. Ancient Roman honey cakes were dense and heavy, resembling a sweet brick more than a dessert. They came in various shapes and textures, ranging from mildly spongy to unbelievably tough, requiring a knife. The traditional recipe involved mixing cheese, flour, and eggs into a thick dough, forming it into a neat small loaf, and baking it on a leaf. After all, if you did not bake on leaves, could you really call it Roman? Once baked, the cakes were soaked in honey, not merely drizzled or glazed, but thoroughly drenched. A soak so intense it could ruin both a tunic and friendships when only one slice was left. Honey was like liquid gold in Rome, serving as a sweetener, preservative, skin remedy, and the perfect answer to what should we pour on this questionable cake. The final product was a sticky, faintly tangy, cheesy, sweet treat that stuck to your fingers and your social standing. These cakes appeared at religious celebrations, family events, and sacrifices to household deities, meaning sometimes your breakfast pastry doubled as a spiritual offering. No pressure there. Like most Roman cuisine, social status influenced the recipe. Poorer households might use barley or rye, omit cheese, and add just a little diluted honey, resulting in something barely a cake. Wealthy Romans, of course, enriched theirs with nuts, exotic spices, and enough honey to overwhelm a seasoned soldier. The surprising part is that despite its oddities, they were adored. These treats were genuinely loved by those who ate them. Recalled from youth, contended over at feasts and gathered carefully like bees storing honey. They were not elaborate or visually appealing, yet they had a sweet, sticky nature that could ignite arguments over ownership. Picture waking up in ancient Rome. The streets are already bustling with noise. Your neighbor is yelling about unpaid rent, and your head aches from last night's single cup of diluted wine that ended up as 4. You are tired, penniless, and running behind schedule. Naturally, you reach for breakfast, but not eggs or fruit, not even a substantial meal. No, you opt for the traditional Roman way to begin the day. Stale bread soaked in wine. Indeed, it existed. The Romans called it sopian venom, which sounds mystical but simply meant bread in wine. Basically, you took old hardened bread, since fresh loaf was either costly or unavailable. You tore it into pieces and soaked it in whatever wine-like liquid was on hand. It was not luxurious or attractive, but served its purpose. The wine softened the rock-solid bread just enough to make it edible. Red or white made no difference. If it contained fermented grapes and was somewhat liquid, it was used. Sometimes herbs or honey were added, though only for special occasions, or when trying to impress someone who had already witnessed you eating dormouse. This was a meal born from practicality and efficiency. Farmers consumed it before long days in the fields. Laborers also ate it. Before hauling bricks under the blazing sun, people consumed it. Philosophers ate it while pretending not to weep openly. If coffee ignites modern civilization, this was Rome's lukewarm, wine-infused counterpart. Naturally, the aristocrats scoffed at it, while secretly enjoying their own refined versions made from aged wine, sweetened bread, and the self-satisfied look of someone feigning modest living for the experience. For the common Roman, however, this was the genuine way to begin the day. Here is the surprise. Sometimes it was not even breakfast. Some individuals simply dipped their bread into wine throughout meals, speeches, or casual overheard conversations in the marketplace. It served as food, drink, and a way of life. Was it nourishing? Hardly. Was it elegant? Not really. Yet it was soft, inexpensive, and soaked in alcohol, which in ancient Rome counted as a positive. Ah, sausages. Humankind's timeless answer to the age-old dilemma: what to do with leftover morsels. No place embraced this challenge more enthusiastically than ancient Rome, where creating sausages was less about following recipes and more about testing the limits of what the law deemed edible. The Roman version, called Lucanica, and named after the Lucania region. By the time it arrived at Roman markets, no one cared much about its origin. What mattered was its salty, greasy, spicy, and oddly chewy nature. The ingredients? That is where the real adventure begins. Lucanica often remained an intriguing enigma. Made from pork scraps, liver, lungs, heart, and perhaps some ingredients better left unmentioned, it was flavored with pepper, cumin, fennel seeds, and a touch of daring. This mixture was then encased in an intestine casing and cooked by grilling, frying, or smoking to disguise the unsettling reality inside. The Romans adored these sausages. Street vendors cooked them openly on small braziers, sending clouds of savory aroma drifting through the already bustling city air. People would gather in lines, dressed in their togas, coins ready to secure their hot and greasy treat. Athletes consumed lucanica for a burst of energy. Philosophers ate it and then pondered their morals. Children eagerly requested it and quickly found regret. Naturally, the quality of sausages varied greatly. Those presented at imperial banquets were likely finely ground and carefully seasoned. Those sold on the streets, however, were best approached with minimal curiosity. Rumors circulated about donkey meat, possibly dog, and certainly organs unfamiliar to any butcher's standard list. Storage methods were hopeful at best. Without refrigeration, and with smoking being more a craft than a precise science, some sausages aged like fine wine. Others spoiled in a way that would have demanded immediate attention from officials. Despite their unpredictability, lucanica was everywhere. Available at Thermopolia, enjoyed at arenas and carried into wars, every Roman soldier trudging across Gaul could rely on two constants: tired feet and a dried sausage tucked in his pouch. It offered a dense source of calories, intense flavor, and enough durability to withstand the rigors of a campaign. These pancakes could also serve as a means of self-defense if the need arose. Let us delve into Roman pancakes, or what they might have termed flat letdowns with a hint of hope. On paper, a lateria seems appealing. It translates roughly to another sweet, and was basically a simple pancake made with spelt flour, eggs, and milk. Occasionally honey was included, sometimes omitted. That unpredictability alone reveals the kind of emotional ups and downs this dish presented. You would prepare the batter, pour it onto a pan over a fire that might cooperate, and wait for the process to unfold. However, Roman culinary magic did not involve fluffy piles or maple syrup. Instead, these pancakes were thin, dense, and just sturdy enough to pass as edible flooring. If fortune smiled upon you, the pancakes were fried in a bit of oil and topped with a generous amount of honey, possibly sprinkled with poppy seeds if the mood was festive. If luck was not on your side, you ended up with a version lacking any toppings, no sweetness, and a texture resembling a legal document. Despite these qualities, they remained popular, inexpensive, simple to make, and remarkably adaptable. They could be sweet or savory, eaten warm or cold, served at celebrations, funerals, or during that awkward gap between breakfast and remorse. Romans were not seeking a breakfast revolution. Their aim was merely to consume calories that posed no threat. But make no mistake, if you picture a modern pancake adorned with strawberries and whipped cream, you must immediately lower your expectations. These were the sorts of pancakes that existed long ago. Cakes back then demanded strong teeth and low expectations. They served as more of a fuel source than a true meal, acting as endurance snacks rather than luxurious brunch items. Yet these cakes held their purpose. They satisfied hunger, paired reasonably well with wine, and gave you, if only for a short moment, a sense of control over your life. In an era filled with invasions, political betrayals, and questionable meat sausages, that feeling was no minor consolation. Occasionally, the batter would crisp perfectly around the edges, the honey would caramelize beautifully, and you would think, well, this is almost delicious. That fleeting delight is the genuine legacy of the Roman pancake, setting expectations low enough to make surprising moments of pleasure possible. So, were Roman pancakes bland? Certainly. Were they unexpectedly beloved? Absolutely. In Rome, even something mediocre enjoyed its time to shine, preferably accompanied by a drizzle of honey. There is a raw honesty in Roman cooking. They never pretended their dishes were elegant. They did not remove the fat. When it came to fish, they wasted no time with neat fillets or dainty servings. Instead, they grabbed the whole thing, fried, salty, sometimes unrecognizable, but always crunchy. Picture yourself strolling along the docks of Ostia or catching a breeze near a fish market in Sabura. The aroma of something sizzling and fishy, mixed with the scent of food left out since dawn, hits you. Following your senses leads you to a greasy tray loaded with fried fish bits, coated lovingly in oil, and coated with something that could be flour or perhaps city dust. Nobody is certain anymore about what exactly was being served. The dishes included fish heads, tails, fins, and any small pieces that could be thrown whole into a frying pan. Anchovies were especially popular, along with sardines. Occasionally the Romans would experiment with unknown seafood, frying whatever creatures had accidentally been caught that day. The method was straightforward. Heat some oil, drop the fish in, and hope they crisp up before burning. A sprinkle of salt and, if you felt fancy, a splash of vinegar completed the dish. It was either handed directly to the customer or wrapped in a fig leaf, since cleanliness was often overlooked, which frankly was the norm. These crunchy little seafood treats were everywhere. Thermopolia offered them, market stalls proudly advertised them, and children bought them as snacks. Everyone understood that if the fish was fried enough, you did not need to know which part it came from. Nutritionally, they were valuable, packed with omega-3 fatty acids, protein, and calcium from the bones you eagerly crunched, plus the faint aroma of the Mediterranean lingered for days. The true charm was in the enjoyment. Romans were not after refinement or sophistication. They craved salt, fat, and crunch. These fish bites delivered all of that boldly and greasily, signaling to your stomach, "This is satisfying," while silently telling your pride that this was something not to discuss in polite company. By now you may have tried bread soaked in wine, sausage filled with mysterious ingredients, and a pancake dense enough to be considered a building material. Perhaps you are beginning to see just how adventurous and unpretentious ancient Roman eating habits truly were. Craving something wholesome, something fruity, something that boldly declares, "I made a great choice today." Let me introduce the Roman fig cake, or as some modern scholars prefer to call it, the ancient technique of reinventing leftovers with purpose. Figs were everywhere in Rome, plentiful, inexpensive, and so delicate that the Romans had only about 3 hours before they went from ripe to fermented. So what was done with the surplus? They mashed them into fig cakes, small lumps of crushed figs, sometimes combined with nuts or flour, occasionally molded into round shapes, and almost always served as a dessert. The texture was daring, chewy, sticky, and somewhat alarming if not stored correctly. The flavor depended greatly on how long the figs had been sunning. At best, they were rich and naturally sweet. At worst, they developed a tangy taste that could generously be described as surprising. Sometimes honey was added, which improved the experience. Other times it was not, which led to less enjoyable results. Some recipes included sesame seeds, creating a treat that clung to your teeth like emotional baggage. Others were wrapped in leaves, making them easy to carry and easy to deny ownership of if needed. Despite these modest origins, fig cakes were beloved by all social strata. Farmers took them into the fields as snacks. Philosophers munched on them while critiquing their peers. Even the wealthy enjoyed them, although theirs were often embellished with spices and sophistication. During festivals, these cakes were distributed among the crowds much like the ancient version of granola bars, bringing people together with the taste of a sweet, sticky tradition. Since they did not spoil quickly, fig cakes became the favored choice for offerings to gods, household spirits, and even that neighbor you disliked, but had to remain courteous towards. They were far from elegant. Nobody composed heartfelt poems about them. However, they were dense, nourishing, and incredibly versatile. Their culinary identity could be summed up as simply acceptable. Let's be honest, in a culture where most sweets either stuck to your fingers or tried to flee your plate, the modest fig cake provided a rare sense of steadiness. It lacked brilliance and failed to impress, yet it also never rebelled against you. Sometimes that alone is enough. By this stage of your Roman food adventure, you have consumed enough fermented, fried, and honey-coated items to start doubting your decisions. But do not worry, there is one of Rome's most treasured passions that we have not yet touched on: cheese. More specifically, cheese snacks. These could bring delight or swift remorse. In ancient Rome, cheese was not merely nourishment. It represented an entire mindset. They enjoyed soft cheeses, firm varieties, matured types, and even cheeses that might be seen as biological threats today. Romans loved to nibble on cheese between meals, or, more honestly, between other questionable choices. Let us begin with fried cheese cakes, a popular snack in Thermopolia and taverns. These were prepared by mashing soft cheese, likely resembling ricotta, blending it with flour or semolina, shaping small rounds and frying them in oil until golden. Golden sounds delicious, does it not? It certainly was, but only when enjoyed warm. Allow them to cool for 5 minutes, and suddenly you found yourself biting into something resembling the texture of an old sandal. Some were sweetened using honey, while others contained herbs and had a strong, savory flavor. Occasionally, nuts or dried fruits were added, which theoretically seemed creative, but often resulted in a taste similar to someone accidentally mixing trail mix into a grilled cheese sandwich. If you were especially unlucky, you might encounter aged Roman cheese. This was not your delicate French brie or mild cheddar. Instead, it was hard, pungent, and often described as fragrant, which, in ancient terms, meant you should not breathe in too deeply. Certain varieties were aged until they became more salty than cheesy. Others were kept in baskets, left exposed to the sun, and possibly used to keep unwanted guests away. Cheese snacks were widespread. They were given to soldiers, presented at festivals, and even distributed during Saturnalia, because nothing expresses appreciation quite like a block of dairy that could easily double as a paperweight. They were filling, inexpensive, and remarkably long-lasting, as long as you did not mind them pushing back a bit. Despite their inconsistencies, the Romans loved cheese snacks. These treats were comforting, easy to carry, and rarely threatening. In essence, they were the ancient equivalent of mozzarella sticks, just without the mozzarella or the sticks. Different cultures boast ketchup or hot sauce. The ancients had their own unique flavors. In ancient Rome, there was garum, a fermented fish sauce that found its way on, in, or around almost every edible item throughout the empire. To be clear, garum was not delicate or refined. It was never something casually drizzled. It was concocted by fermenting fish innards, packed into clay containers, heavily salted, and left to bake under the sun until the mixture was completely mellowed. The outcome was a brown, oily, salty, and tangy liquid that Romans generously poured over meats, vegetables, grains, and even snacks. Bread dipped in garum was a common treat. Roasted nuts with garum, certainly. Fried cheese splashed with garum. That was bold, but perfectly in line with Roman culinary daring. Garum's role went beyond mere flavor enhancement. It carried social significance. There were various qualities available. Some were affordable for the common folk, while others were ultra-exclusive, aged longer than most gladiators lived. Different versions like liquamen and alec were marketed across the empire, with labels highlighting their place of origin, purity, and often dubious health claims. Imagine it as an ancient Roman equivalent of artisanal, organic soy sauce, only with a stronger presence of intestines. It is worth noting that the stench of garum production was so offensive that local laws confined these factories outside city borders. Remarkably, even in Rome, where sewage ran openly and public baths were a hit-or-miss affair, garum workshops were forbidden from the city center. However, once bottled and distributed, this sauce became highly valued, with emperors hoarding it like treasure. Cooks highly recommended it. Hungry Romans spread it on almost anything that was not alive. It was the favorite burst of flavor in Rome, and its most widely accepted aromatic offense. Did people truly enjoy it? Apparently, yes. They celebrated it in poetry. They incorporated it into their cookbooks. They wrote affectionate notes to recipes that started with drowning everything in garum. Was it good for health? Possibly. Was it overpowering? Without fail. Did it bring something enchanting to fried street treats? If you prefer your enchantment strong, fishy, and slightly suspicious, then absolutely. So when you imagine Roman fast food, do not only picture cheese balls or fig pastries. Picture cheese balls and fig pastries drenched in fermented fish sauce. That was how victory tasted in Rome. If you still crave a snack, something easygoing, something crunchy, something to eat with one hand while gesturing dramatically with the other at passing senators, then consider Roman street nuts. Stroll through any lively Roman market, the Forum, the harbor at Ostia, or the narrow streets of Subura, and you would hear the distinct crackle of nuts roasting over open flames. Not the cozy holiday scent, but rather the aroma of burning street carts mixed with salty temptation. Your options include almonds, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts, although the latter might cost a small fortune, and maybe your pride if you drop them. Most were roasted, lightly salted, sometimes enhanced with herbs or honey. Simple, addictive, and utterly Roman. Affordable and convenient, vendors sold them in small paper cones crafted from recycled wax. These cones often contained tablets or scraps of papyrus, sometimes bearing grocery notes or poorly written poems, adding an unexpected touch of amusement. And the Romans had a passion for nuts. Philosophers nibbled on them while contemplating life's fleeting nature. Gladiators consumed them for their protein boost. At boisterous gatherings, tipsy guests stuffed them into their mouths and even into amphorae with varying success. Even emperors enjoyed these snacks, though theirs were carefully peeled, gilded, and probably delivered on a silver tray by someone nervous. Some nuts were even candied. Almonds drizzled with honey served as ancient Rome's version of peanut brittle, capable of breaking a tooth or winning your heart, depending on their freshness. Naturally, there were drawbacks. Consuming too many nuts, especially those dusted with garam masala or spices, could cause indigestion, social embarrassment, and even dramatic farewells involving last wills. But none of that stopped anyone, because these street nuts were quick, affordable, and deeply satisfying. They were the original vending machines of Rome. Insert some coins and receive a crunchy delight. No fuss, no mysterious meat, no stories, just a handful of salty pleasure in a city fueled by wine, desire, and chaotic energy. You have celebrated like a senator, you have bathed in wine, sang off-key at a Saturnalia feast, maybe even kissed someone who turned out to be your cousin's cousin's servant. Now it is the morning after. Your toga is still on. Feeling sideways with your mouth tasting like fermented fish sauce and plagued by regrettable decisions seems inevitable. You urgently require assistance, but in ancient Rome, relief does not come in the form of common remedies such as aspirin or a cup of black coffee. Instead, what awaits is a brave, somewhat medicinal bite and a faint hope that Jupiter's favor remains upon you. This is the world of Roman hangover cuisine. To begin, the universal remedy involves bread soaked in wine once again. Because what could be a better solution to a wine-created catastrophe than more wine absorbed by a stale loaf, so dry it might exfoliate your gums? Another possibility is being served a raw egg mixed into spiced wine called pusca ovata. Consider it an ancient version of a protein shake, lacking refrigeration, cleanliness, or pleasantness. You swallow it while someone older than the Republic insists it will balance your humors. Still feeling woozy? It is time for a snack platter from Etruscan origins. Olives, garlic, onions soaked in vinegar, and possibly a piece of pickled fish are offered, since nothing clears out your sinuses quite like salty brine accompanied by regret. One famous choice includes fried cabbage seasoned with cumin and oil. It was believed to work wonders, but in reality, it was greasy, strong-smelling, and more likely to create new troubles than solve existing ones. Roman physicians promoted it, but diners usually cursed it. There were also sweeter alternatives, such as figs drizzled with honey and vinegar, or dates steeped in wine and sprinkled with pepper. Those probably provided some relief, being sweet, hydrating, and interesting enough to take your mind off the headache. And if nothing else helped, going all out like a gladiator was always an option. A small handful of barley, a raw onion, and a sharp blow to the chest to awaken your senses. No science behind it, just pure confidence mixed with a touch of shame. The Romans did not refer to this as a hangover, but described it as having a troubled mind, which honestly seems more fitting. Their remedies were inconsistent in effectiveness, yet they had unwavering faith in them the same way they admired fried dormice as a delicacy. Picture yourself leaning over a thermopolium counter, sipping spiced vinegar and nibbling on cabbage, silently begging Bacchus for relief. This is how recovery looked in ancient Rome. Before he became the feared enemy of Rome and elephants marched through the Alps, Hannibal Barca was simply a young boy with wide eyes, a sharp intellect, and already molded by a thirst for vengeance. The year is approximately 237 before the Common Era. Carthage, once a dominant North African power, had just been defeated in the First Punic War against Rome. The one feeling this loss most acutely was Hamilcar Barca, the boy's father. Hamilcar was not only a general, but a representation of Carthaginian defiance, fierce, intelligent, and deeply wounded by Rome's triumph. His fight was far from over. When Hamilcar set out for Iberia, what we now know as Spain, to rebuild Carthage's might and establish a new empire, he took his 9-year-old son with him. This journey was not for family bonding, it was an initiation. According to legend, before their departure, Hamilcar brought Hannibal to the temple of Baal and made him place his small hand onto a bloodied sacrificial altar. There his father bound him with a solemn vow never to form an alliance with Rome, never to accept or overlook their presence, and certainly never to befriend them. Imagine that. Few children grow up learning mathematics, swordsmanship, and nurturing a lifelong grudge as their main lessons. But Hannibal's upbringing was far from ordinary. His school was the battlefield. His father acted as his commander, and his education revolved entirely around vengeance. As they advanced into the Iberian Peninsula, Hannibal absorbed every detail. He witnessed his father winning ruthless conflicts, creating fragile partnerships, and seizing land territory by territory. Every Roman envoy who tried to intervene was carefully observed by Hannibal. He memorized every failed discussion and marked every Carthaginian soldier who shed blood on foreign lands. By the time Hamilcar passed away and leadership transferred to Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal, the young warrior was already steeled by experience. When Hasdrubal was assassinated after several years, Hannibal, aged 26, was chosen by the troops to take charge, not the Senate or the elders, but the soldiers who had seen him grow, fight, and lead. At this turning point, the childhood oath transformed into an adult's unwavering purpose. Rome had only won the opening battle, but Hannibal Barca was preparing to redefine their understanding of war and dread. Without hesitation, the moment he assumed command of the Carthaginian forces in Iberia, he unleashed a ruthless, overwhelmingly powerful campaign that would send shivers through Rome across the Mediterranean. He started with the tribes inhabiting Hispania, which were divided, proud, and perpetually hostile towards one another. Instead of advancing as a conqueror, Hannibal employed diplomacy, marriage alliances, and bribery to sway some tribes to his side. For those who resisted, he resorted to force. The tribes that opposed him were subdued through a combination of tactical genius in battle and psychological tactics. Hannibal did not simply engage in fights. He orchestrated them carefully. He would permit a portion of his army to fake a retreat, then ambush and encircle the enemy once they believed victory was within reach. He maneuvered strategies as skillfully as he wielded his sword, earning immense admiration from his soldiers. Hannibal shared their meals, marched with them, and stood amidst the fiercest fights. He was not a sheltered commander overseeing from a luxurious carriage. He suffered alongside them. His ability to inspire unwavering loyalty was matched by the fear he instilled with overwhelming intensity. As Carthage's influence expanded across Iberia, Rome started to feel the growing threat. Previously, they had arranged a treaty with Hasdrubal stating Carthage would not cross the Ebro River. However, Hannibal disregarded Roman agreements. He had a grand vision in mind. Therefore, he directed his forces toward Saguntum, a Roman ally located just south of the Ebro. Targeting the city was not merely daring, it amounted to an open declaration of hostility. Rome watched anxiously, unsure if Carthage would restrain its ambitious young leader. Spoiler, they did not. The siege of Saguntum was ruthless and highly effective. Hannibal cut off their supplies, starving the city into submission. They relentlessly struck their fortifications and ultimately seized control of the city. Those who survived faced either death or enslavement. Rome received its definitive confirmation. Hannibal was not bluffing and showed no fear. Naturally, the Roman Senate erupted in anger. They insisted that Carthage surrender Hannibal for breaching their agreement. Carthage, however, responded with indifference. The Senate engaged in heated discussions. The aristocrats argued endlessly, but nobody possessed the courage or perhaps the willingness to stop him. Hannibal had become more influential than Carthage itself. Now, having secured Iberia and knowing Rome's fury across the sea, he set his sights on Italy. Not by sailing, nor through formal declarations of war, but by accomplishing the unimaginable. He intended to bring the conflict directly to Rome, using elephants as his unconventional weapons. When Hannibal revealed his plan to invade Italy by crossing the Alps on foot rather than by sea or diplomacy, his commanders believed he had lost reason. The Alps were far more than mere mountains. They were perilous, snow-covered wildernesses teeming with hostile tribes, and death lurked at every step. No rational leader would undertake such an expedition, especially with thousands of troops, supply animals, and a few African war elephants in tow. Yet Hannibal did not seek reason. His goal was to shock and awe his enemies. In 218 years before the Common Era, he launched one of the most audacious military operations in ancient times. Leading an army of approximately 50,000 soldiers and 37 elephants, Hannibal moved northward from Iberia, crossed the Pyrenees, clashed with Celtic tribes, and finally arrived at the Rhone River. At that point, he relied on rafts and local guides to transport his elephants across rivers. Yes, elephants on rafts. The complexity of the operation was unbelievable. Rome was completely unprepared. They anticipated his approach by sea, or, at worst, along the usual coastal paths. Yet Hannibal was breaking all the norms, and he had not even reached the Alps yet. When the climb into the mountains finally began, everything that could possibly fail did so. Landslides buried critical gear. Snowstorms disoriented the troops. Illness from high altitude, bitter cold winds, and hunger claimed thousands of lives. Supplies dwindled rapidly, and the spirits of his soldiers hit rock bottom. Men deserted in despair. Elephants slipped on icy tracks and fell into deep ravines. One soldier was reportedly forced to chip frozen horse hooves out of solid ice with a pickaxe. But Hannibal pressed on. He inspired his men by pointing to the distant Italian plains, promising them fertile land, spoils of war, and vengeance against Rome. He used fire to break ice, vinegar to crumble rock, and unyielding determination to pull his army over nature's harshest barriers. After 2 grueling weeks, nearly half of his original troops lost and barely alive, Hannibal arrived in the Po Valley exhausted, frostbitten, and worn down. Meanwhile, Italy and Rome were struck with terror. They never imagined their enemy would arrive in such an unprecedented manner. The Alps were considered impassable, especially with elephants. Yet Hannibal achieved the impossible. This was more than a march. It was a clear warning. Rome is vulnerable. There was nowhere left to turn. Hannibal had arrived, and he had no intention of departing anytime soon. The moment he set foot on Italian territory, he wasted no time. Despite having fewer troops, he instantly began persuading dissatisfied GIC tribes in northern Italy, sworn enemies of Rome, to join his cause. They rallied to him. Hannibal did not merely offer freedom, he demonstrated it through relentless combat. Rome, shocked but still full of pride, hurried to deploy legions to confront him. Consul Gaius Flaminius took charge, aflame with the Republic's unwavering confidence. His desire was for a rapid and magnificent triumph that would restore Roman honor after Hannibal's unbelievable Alpine crossing. However, Hannibal had already selected his battleground, and it would bring no glory to anyone in a red cloak. The site was Lake Trasimene, a misty, confined valley bordered by water on one side and steep hills on the other, ideal for an ambush. Hannibal placed his infantry up front, clearly in plain sight as bait. Meanwhile, he hid his cavalry and elite units among the hills, concealed by the early morning fog. On the 21st of June, 217 years before the Common Era, Flaminius charged forth, driven by eagerness, arrogance, and a total lack of awareness of the danger ahead. As the Romans marched into the snare, Hannibal's forces struck suddenly. His soldiers burst from the hills, hitting the Roman flanks hard. The cavalry cut off any chance of retreat. The Roman ranks, stretched thin along the narrow valley, were trapped and unable to maneuver. Chaos erupted. Soldiers drowned in the lake, were crushed trying to escape, or were brutally cut down in the overwhelming attack. The place where they stood marked a decisive moment. Flaminius himself fell while trying to inspire his faltering troops. Within just several hours, 15,000 Romans had perished, and thousands more were taken prisoner. Remarkably, Hannibal did not lose a single officer. The ambush near Lake Trasimene became the largest and most effective surprise attack ever recorded in military history. Panic overwhelmed Rome. The streets echoed with screams and desperate prayers. Mothers cried for their lost sons. In a state of despair, the Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator to manage the crisis. However, Hannibal had not finished his campaign. He had invaded Roman lands, destroyed their armies, and now moved through Italy like an unstoppable phantom, leaving ruin wherever he entered. Yet, despite this catastrophe, Rome would not agree to peace. That was exactly what Hannibal wanted. He sought not peace, but to disgrace them where they believed themselves strongest, on the battlefield, in the very heart of their empire. His most lethal achievement was still ahead. If the engagement at Lake Trasimene was Hannibal's greatest ambush, then Cannae would be his unparalleled masterpiece of destruction. By the year 216, before the Common Era, Rome had abandoned hesitation. The time for patience and defense was over. They assembled the largest force in their history, about 80,000 soldiers, commanded by consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Their army was twice the size of Hannibal's troops. Their strategy was not to outsmart him, but to overwhelm him with immense force. Hannibal understood this plan and welcomed the challenge. He carefully selected the battlefield, an expansive plain, ideal for his tactics, and the deadly encounter that would follow. Near the southern Italian town of Cannae, a flat plain ideal for cavalry movement provided the stage. Hannibal positioned his forces in a formation that appeared simple, but was cleverly devised. His most vulnerable infantry, predominantly Gauls and Spaniards, formed a thin crescent in the center. On the sides, his stronger African infantry awaited. His cavalry, the real force of impact, extended widely on both flanks. The snare was ready. At dawn, the Romans advanced in a compact and powerful column, determined to break through Hannibal's center. Initially, the crescent bowed inward under the Roman pressure, slowly retreating without breaking apart. The Roman troops pushed deeper, convinced that victory was within reach. Then the trap closed. Hannibal's African infantry on both wings turned inward, surrounding the Romans on either side. His cavalry, having already defeated the Roman horsemen, returned to attack from behind. The Romans were now completely encircled. No way out, no space to breathe, only confusion and bloodshed. In the scorching heat of August, men suffocated under the weight of bodies. Swords had no room to swing. Fear took hold. Hannibal's soldiers methodically cut down the trapped enemy, turning it into one of the most one-sided slaughters in military history. Around 50 to 70,000 Romans died in a single day, surpassing the entire population of many ancient cities. This marked Rome's most devastating loss ever and remains one of the most remarkable military defeats. One of the most lethal confrontations in history involves Hannibal, who did not advance on Rome not because he was incapable, but because he understood that Rome would not collapse easily. He required reinforcements from Carthage, siege machinery, and time. However, Carthage hesitated. Even after delivering Rome its darkest defeat, Hannibal remained isolated. Meanwhile, Rome, injured, vengeful, and deeply fearful, intended to punish him severely. Following Cannae, the mere mention of Hannibal's name could quiet a Roman crowd. Mothers warned their children with tales of Hannibal's approach, saying, "Hannibal is at the gates." Yet, strangely, he never entered the city itself. For 16 years, Hannibal wandered the Italian countryside like a shadow, undefeated, unpredictable, and entirely unsupported. He gained the allegiance of various southern Italian cities and sowed disorder among Rome's allies. Nevertheless, despite Carthage's wealth, it refused to dispatch the aid he needed to finish the campaign decisively. The Senate feared his rising influence. His adversaries back home murmured about his ambitions. They preferred watching him gradually wear down Rome rather than equipping him for a final assault. Consequently, Hannibal had to change tactics. He became an expert in survival, engaging in guerrilla-style battles, disrupting supply routes, destroying crops, and remaining just beyond reach. The Romans, led by Fabius Maximus, who was nicknamed the Delayer, avoided direct confrontations. They pursued him cautiously, starving him of chances to strike. Despite this, Hannibal still achieved significant victories. Triumphs followed one another as Hannibal shattered Roman troops at Hardonia, ambushed them in Apulia, and even annihilated entire consular armies brave enough to pursue him. He achieved all this without ever suffering a significant defeat. However, the passage of time favored Rome. Despite being battered, Rome remained unyielding and adapted with determination. They raised additional legions, trained fresh commanders, and fortified their alliances. While Hannibal roamed Italy with a dwindling force, Rome extended its influence like a hydra sprouting new heads, shifting the war's focus to other regions. Rome launched an invasion into Iberia, severing Carthaginian supply routes. Hannibal's own brother Hasdrubal attempted to bring reinforcements by crossing the Alps, mirroring Hannibal's earlier route. Yet Rome intercepted and crushed Hasdrubal's army, famously tossing his severed head into Hannibal's camp as a grim warning, "You are alone now." Hannibal's vision of undermining Rome from within was slipping away. He had transformed Italy into a battlefield littered with Roman legions, but lacking reinforcements, siege weapons, and political support. Delivering a decisive strike was impossible. Nevertheless, Hannibal remained determined. Having vowed to his father as a child to never befriend Rome, he upheld that oath every year he stayed on their land. Nevertheless, Rome's advance would soon threaten Carthage itself. Hannibal faced the unavoidable choice of returning home to confront the final battle. By 203 years before the Common Era, the momentum had completely shifted. Rome had clawed its way back from near ruin, having defeated Hannibal's forces. Strongholds in Iberia fell, and the battle moved directly to North Africa. At the forefront of this campaign was Scipio Africanus, a young and brilliant general who had dedicated himself to studying Hannibal's strategies extensively. Rome was no longer willing to wait patiently. Their goal was the complete destruction of Carthage. In response, the Carthaginian Senate faced an unimaginable decision. They called Hannibal back home. After 16 years of legendary military operations in Italy, Hannibal departed from the land where he had shed so much blood. He returned to Carthage to protect a city that had once forsaken him and to confront an opponent well versed in the very tactics he had pioneered. The decisive confrontation took place at Zama in the year 208 BCE. This time, neither side held a clear advantage. Hannibal led a combined force of seasoned veterans, less experienced recruits, and 80 war elephants. On the other hand, Scipio commanded well-trained Roman legions, along with Numidian cavalry under Massinissa, a former ally of Carthage who had defected. Hannibal began the conflict with a colossal elephant charge intended to break the Roman troops' formation. However, Scipio had anticipated this move and instructed his soldiers to create openings in their lines, forming channels that allowed the elephants to pass through safely. Some animals panicked or moved harmlessly among Roman ranks, while others turned and caused chaos within Hannibal's own army. What followed was a brutal infantry battle. Hannibal's battle-hardened soldiers fought with exceptional bravery, even managing to push back the Roman front line momentarily. Yet the tide shifted when Scipio's cavalry returned from the flanks, launching a surprise attack from behind, just as the battle reached its peak. At Cannae, Hannibal had achieved a stunning victory, but the Carthaginian lineup soon fell apart. The roles had turned upside down. Hannibal, who was once the master of encirclement tactics, became the one surrounded himself. Carthage was compelled to capitulate, accepting harsh demands. They had to relinquish their navy, pay an enormous compensation, and vow never to wage war without Rome's approval. Hannibal faced defeat. However, this loss went beyond a mere military setback. It marked the end of his grand vision. His lifelong goal to break Rome's hold over the Mediterranean was crushed beneath the North African sands. Yet, despite this failure, Rome chose not to execute him. His enemies feared that making him a martyr would only strengthen his legacy. Instead, they spared his life, fully aware that his story was far from over. Hannibal Barca still had history left to shape. Returning to Carthage, Hannibal was no longer just a defeated commander, but a figure who had survived against the odds. Even though Zama dealt a military blow to Carthage, Hannibal maintained enormous respect from his people. To them, he was not the man who lost the war, but the one who almost triumphed against overwhelming challenges. So how did Hannibal move forward? He transformed his role entirely. The same man who once led elephants across the Alps took a seat in Carthage's Senate, dedicating himself to fighting corruption, fixing the economy, and rebuilding the broken state. He reduced taxes, cleared debts, and restored Carthage's financial stability. This swift turnaround earned him a reputation as a sharp and determined reformer, even if not everyone admired him. Still, Rome watched these developments closely from afar. They were afraid of Hannibal's intellect even more than his sword. A powerful Carthage, even if peaceful, posed a danger if Hannibal was leading it. Therefore, Rome falsely accused him of plotting with enemy nations. Trapped once more, Hannibal fled, marking the start of his second existence, a hunted exile. He traveled from one royal court to another, offering his military brilliance to foreign monarchs. His first stop was Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, Rome's latest adversary. Hannibal sought to inspire them for a new great conflict, but Antiochus disregarded much of his guidance and suffered a crushing defeat. Rome's dominance only intensified. After Antiochus's downfall, Hannibal continued on the run. He became a phantom roaming Asia Minor, relentlessly chased by Roman agents demanding his betrayal at every harbor. Yet wherever he went, he left behind tales, rumors, and fear. The name Hannibal still sent shudders through Roman ranks. In spite of his setbacks, he stayed a symbol of resistance, a solitary rebellion against imperial pride. He could not assemble new forces without a homeland or authority. He had only a brilliant mind, a lingering presence, and enemies who never ceased observing him. By this time he was in his 60s, his hair silver, his body worn down by many years of warfare and exile. Still, Hannibal's mind remained keener than most living commanders. Yet Rome's hunger for his end was unquenchable. They wished not only to remove him from the stage of politics or battle, but to erase him from history itself. So they pursued him one last time. And Hannibal, steadfast and true, faced his fate. Hannibal, driven by his principles, refused to grant his enemies the satisfaction they sought. By the early 2nd century before the Common Era, he had become both a living legend and a considerable danger, not only to Rome, but also to any kingdom daring enough to offer him refuge. At that time, he was concealed in Bithynia, a modest kingdom in Asia Minor, governed by King Prusius Cersters. True to his cunning nature, Hannibal assisted the king in winning a naval engagement by deploying a clever tactic. Catapults hurled clay containers filled with poisonous snakes onto enemy vessels, unleashing terror and confusion. Even during his final days, Hannibal's mind remained sharp, always planning several steps ahead. However, Rome was indifferent to these snake attacks. Their ultimate goal was to eliminate Hannibal permanently. They applied intense pressure on King Prusius, dispatched envoys, and issued threats. Eventually, news arrived that Hannibal's refuge had been compromised. Roman operatives were closing in on the villa where he had sought shelter. This time, he chose not to flee. According to tradition, Hannibal had long kept a small vial of poison hidden inside a ring, carrying it as a last resort. Should Rome trap him like a cornered beast, he intended to control his fate by ending his own life. When the time came, he supposedly wrote a brief note before drinking the poison. "Let us relieve the Romans from their long anxiety, since they think it too tedious a task to wait for an old man's death." Just like that, it was finished. Hannibal Barca, Rome's most dreaded adversary, died not in combat, but in a distant land, hunted, exiled, and isolated. Yet, even in death, Rome was unable to erase his legacy. They demolished his city, rebuilt Carthage several decades later during the Third Punic War, and even sowed its land with salt. Yet they never lost sight of him. Centuries afterward, Roman historians, men who ought to have despised him, described his genius with admiration. He led courageously from the front lines, battled insurmountable odds, and outmaneuvered every Roman commander dispatched to defeat him. He crossed the Alps accompanied by elephants, ravaged Italy for many years, and instilled terror in the greatest military power the world had ever seen. Throughout it all, he remained loyal to a single promise made in his youth, to never ally with Rome. Even in exile and beyond death, Hannibal triumphed in a different conflict, the struggle for immortality. In that battle, he remains unbeaten. Each autumn in ancient Greece, a remarkable change enveloped the land, stretching from Athens to the modest town of Eleusis. Pathways became crowded with chanting devotees. Smoke and incense floated across the hills. In the depths of night, under the glow of torches and shrouded in secrecy, a sacred and forbidden ceremony unfolded. This was the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most renowned and enigmatic religious festival of its era. It transcended mere celebration, serving as a profound spiritual initiation. Unlike the wild Dionysian feasts or the grand public spectacle of the Olympic Games, this festival was governed by strict rules. Silence was paramount. To reveal or discuss what occurred within the sacred chamber risked capital punishment. The heart of the festival. This story revolves around Deita, the goddess of the harvest, and her daughter Persephone. According to legend, Persephone was taken by Hades, the ruler of the underworld. Overwhelmed with grief, Deita caused the crops across the land to wither as a sign of mourning. Eventually, an agreement was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld and part of it on the surface. This myth evolved into a powerful symbol representing the agricultural cycle, death and rebirth, decay and regrowth. However, the mysteries connected to this tale were not solely about farming. They held a cosmic significance as well. For the ancient Greeks, this was more than just an agricultural story. It reflected the destiny of the soul. Those who took part in the ceremonies, called Maid, underwent a journey lasting several days. They practiced fasting, bathed in the sea, and carried holy objects. Upon reaching Eleusis, they entered the Telesterion, a majestic hall where the most secretive rites took place. What occurred inside this chamber remains uncertain. Some scholars suggest it included a symbolic performance of Persephone's return, while others believe it was a visionary experience, possibly enhanced by a hallucinogenic drink named Kikon. Whatever the true nature of the experience, it profoundly affected those who participated. Notables such as Emperor Hadrian and philosopher Plato were among the many great thinkers of ancient times who underwent the Eleusinian mysteries and emerged convinced that death was not the final fate. The religion was not about mere compliance, but about transformation, a sacred encounter with the cycles of existence, loss, and renewal. Remarkably, the Eleusinian mysteries lasted for more than 1,000 years, outlasting many other ancient traditions. For centuries, empires persisted until the emergence of Christianity. The ancient gods were banned, and the secrets of Eleusis were concealed forever. No one ever dared to break the vow of silence. Consequently, the mystery remains intact. While Greece shrouded its sacred rituals in enigma, ancient Egypt chose a far more dazzling approach. Their public religious celebrations were grand, and none was more spectacular than the Opet festival held every year in the majestic city of Thebes. This festival ranked among the most splendid religious occasions in ancient Egypt. Its goal was to renew the pharaoh's divine nature and reaffirm his holy connection with the gods, particularly Amun-Ra, the principal deity of Thebes. The festival began at the enormous Karnak temple, the residence of the powerful god Amun, his wife Mut, and their son Khonsu, known as the Theban Triad. Priests transported their sacred statues enclosed within golden shrines on ceremonial boats called barks. These vessels were no ordinary boats. They were huge, lavishly adorned, and frequently carried on the shoulders of many priests through the city streets. Afterwards, they were floated down the Nile River. Their end point was the Luxor Temple, approximately 2 kilometers away, connected to Karnak by a magnificent avenue adorned with hundreds of sphinxes. The passage between the temples was far from quiet or solemn. Instead, it was lively, theatrical, and bursting with ceremony. Dancers, musicians, acrobats, and priests chanting filled the avenues. Ordinary citizens flocked in great numbers, not only to observe, but to take part in the festivities. For countless Egyptians, this was an opportunity to witness the divine, not concealed within the sacred chambers of a temple, but displayed openly, proudly, and brilliantly throughout the city. This event was more than just a ceremonial spectacle. The pharaoh personally participated in the parade, often engaging in sacred reenactments. In certain periods, it was thought that the god Amun spiritually united with the pharaoh during the ritual, renewing his divine authority to govern. This renewal of power did not come through warfare, but through cosmic endorsement. There was also a profoundly human aspect. During the festival, the rigid separations between priest and commoner, deity and mortal, became blurred. People celebrated with feasts, drinks, and dance. It was joy intertwined with holiness. A fleeting moment when the heavens seemed to touch the earth. The Opet festival extended from anywhere between 11 to 27 days, depending on the era and the pharaoh's resources. Each celebration had its own unique character, yet the core message stayed consistent. Egypt was harmonious, the gods were satisfied, and the divine law of Ma'at continued to prevail. For the Egyptians, this signified everything. While the Eleusinian mysteries unveiled divine secrets, and the Opet festival highlighted royal divinity, Saturnalia was an entirely different experience. This week-long festivity allowed Rome to abandon its strict rules with delight. Held every December in tribute to Saturn, the Roman god of agriculture, time, and freedom, Saturnalia was a deeply entrenched celebration, marking the end of the harvest and stirring fond remembrance. Yearning for the legendary golden era when Saturn reigned and all people were free and equal, the Romans experienced a brief time filled with chaos as they attempted to revive that dream. It started with a ritual offering at Saturn's temple in the Forum, followed by a communal feast. Then every social rule was completely reversed. Masters waited on their slaves, while senators wore brightly colored tunics in place of their usual togas. Gambling, typically forbidden, was openly allowed. Work came to a halt. Schools were closed, courts stopped operating, Rome ceased to function normally. One of the most unusual customs during this festival was the selection of a Saturnalian king, sometimes known as the Lord of Misrule. This role was often assigned to a person of low social rank, a slave, or even a child, who was given temporary authority to command silly and outrageous orders. Commands like singing naked in the streets or balancing a plate on your head were part of the revelry, and obeying these commands added to the amusement. Moreover, Saturnalia was a time for exchanging presents such as wax candles, small figurines, and even poetry. The festival was cheerful, full of laughter, and had a comforting atmosphere that seems strangely recognizable. Many historians believe that Saturnalia is one of the cultural forerunners of Christmas, with its timing, gift-giving, candles, and feasting resonating through history. However, Saturnalia was more than just a celebration. It served as a safety valve for a society strictly divided, with slaves at the bottom and senators at the top. For a short time, it created the illusion that everyone was equal, despite the rigid social hierarchy. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance to return to Saturn's legendary golden era. Naturally, when the festival concluded, normal life resumed immediately. Servants slipped back into their roles. The Senate picked up its endless arguments. The city streets grew quiet once more. Yet during that extraordinary week of role reversal, Rome transformed into a vibrant stage filled with happiness, disorder, and a deep sense of shared humanity. After all, even the greatest empire needs a moment to pause and let go of its carefully maintained facade of control. Long before digital alarms and countdowns ushered in the new year, ancient Persians were commemorating a festival of renewal, harmony, and fire, a celebration that endures to this day. Novus, known as the Persian New Year, has its roots in Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest monotheistic religions in existence. Novus was far more than merely flipping to a new calendar date. It marked the spring equinox, a unique instant when daylight and darkness reach perfect equilibrium. For Zoroastrians, this balance symbolized the timeless conflict between Ahura Mazda, the embodiment of light and order, and Angra Mainyu, the force of darkness and chaos. Novus represented the triumph of light over shadow, purity over corruption, and hope over despair. Preparations started weeks beforehand. Houses were meticulously cleaned, walls scrubbed spotless, and outstanding debts cleared. But this was much beyond ordinary spring cleaning. It was a profound spiritual renewal. All things impure or unsettling had to be removed. Fires were kindled in open courtyards and along the city ramparts. On the night before the new year, participants would leap across the flames, shouting, "Give me your red color, take away my sickness." Fire held a sacred place as a purifying force in the celebration. Zoroastrian faith was never just about warmth and illumination. It symbolized cleansing and renewal. Then appeared the Haftsin table, an altar-like setup featuring 7 symbolic items, all starting with the Persian letter S. Sabze represented sprouted greens signifying growth. Sur represented garlic for safeguarding. Senjed was dried fruit symbolizing love. Sirke stood for vinegar, which meant wisdom and much more. Each element embodied a moral or cosmic principle. Fire temples hosted special rituals during this occasion. Zoroastrian priests, dressed in white robes, chanted sacred hymns from the Avesta, their holy scriptures, while offering aromatic woods to the continuously burning sacred fire. For devotees, this period was a moment to contemplate, realign with truth, welcome the new beginning, and accept the turning of the cosmic cycle. However, Nowruz was not solely a serious affair. It radiated joyfulness. Families came together, tables were laden with abundant food, children received presents, and musicians filled the streets with the sounds of drums and flutes. In a culture that cherished cosmic harmony, this was a time when everything refreshed, not just the year, but the spirit itself. Nowruz survived the rise and fall of empires. It was observed by the Achaemenids, the Parthians, and the Sassanids, and it is still celebrated today throughout Iran, Central Asia, and beyond. Few ancient religious festivals have lasted this long, yet that is hardly surprising since few are so gracefully centered around something as universal and everlasting as the return of light to the world. In ancient Athens, worship was not always about incense and quiet reverence. At times it involved masks, wine, and a deity who certainly knew how to host a celebration. Dionysus, the deity of wine, fertility, theater, and divine frenzy, was celebrated with unmatched energy during the grand Dionysia held each spring. This event was far from a minor or secret ritual. It stood as one of the most significant public occasions in Athens. Instead of solemn sacrifices or quiet prayers, Dionysus was honored through theatrical performances. Tragedies and comedies were presented in his honor. The festival began with a citywide procession where participants carried large phallic emblems, truly massive, waved ivy-adorned staffs, and sang hymns leading a statue of Dionysus to the theater bearing his name, located near the Acropolis. The sounds of flutes and dancers filled the air, accompanied by an overwhelming surge of wine-fueled excitement. Following this lively parade, the main attraction took place. Over several days, playwrights engaged in a hallowed contest, each presenting 3 tragedies and a satyr play. These were no ordinary performances, but official state events overseen by distinguished judges and attended by as many as 15,000 spectators at once. Attending was considered a civic responsibility to the point where prisoners could receive bail specifically to go. The stories told revolved around gods, destiny, arrogance, vengeance, warfare, and suffering. Legendary figures such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides shared tales that pierced the heart. Picture experiencing Oedipus's devastating realization that he married his own mother while your neighbors sit nearby, breathless with shock. This was more than mere amusement. It was a sacred ritual of emotional cleansing. After the tragedies, the festival continued with comedies that were bawdy, politically charged, and often absurd, with Aristophanes using humor as a powerful tool. Mock politicians challenged the concept of war and criticized society itself. Nothing was considered off-limits. However, at its essence, Dionysia was about more than mere performance. It encouraged stepping beyond oneself, dismantling the masks society demands we wear, and donning actual ones to express truths that could not be spoken openly. It combined chaos with meaning. Dionysus was not a composed, orderly deity. He was wild, untamed, acting as a link between civilization and its primal origins. The Dionysia created a space for that raw side of humanity to breathe, shout, laugh, and mourn. For the Athenians, this was not an escape. This was a form of worship, a reflection held up to the soul with a wine cup in hand, and the god of ecstatic transformation observing silently from the sidelines. Among ancient religious celebrations, few are as lively, theatrical, and spiritually subversive as Purim. This Jewish holiday is part survival tale, part political satire, and wholly devoted to divine irony. Purim honors the narrative from the Book of Esther, set during the Persian Empire under King Ahasuerus, likely Xerxes II. The storyline almost resembles a drama from the Great Dionysia. Esther, a Jewish woman who becomes queen and hides her identity, ultimately risks everything to thwart a massacre plan devised by the king's advisor, Haman. She succeeds. Haman is executed on his own gallows, and the Jewish people are spared. This tale illustrates a reversal of destiny, the hidden workings of divine providence, and the immense power of bravery. Still, unlike serious religious holidays, Purim is pure, unrestrained happiness, a festival that honors survival through laughter and freedom. The celebration kicks off with a public reading of the Megillah, the Book of Esther, often presented as a humorous, theatrical performance. Whenever Haman's name appears, the audience drowns it out with graggers, noisemakers, drinks, and loud cheers. Children dress up as Esther, Mordecai, or even Haman. Costumes and lively disorder are highly encouraged. Then come the festive obligations, indulging in rich meals, sharing food with friends, giving to those in need, and famously drinking until one can no longer tell the difference between "Blessed is Mordecai" and "Cursed is Haman." Indeed, this odd tradition is documented in the Talmud. Beneath the jubilant atmosphere, however, lies a deeper message. Unlike other Jewish festivals, God's name is never spoken in the Book of Esther, not a single time. This makes it unique among all the books in the Hebrew Bible. This deliberate omission invites readers to discover subtle divine influence, teaching faith through unseen guidance rather than overt miracles. Purim shows that miracles may not always be dramatic displays of nature, but can happen quietly behind palace walls through bravery, risk-taking, and unexpected champions. Therefore, the holiday is celebrated with parody, masks, satire, and storytelling. People laugh in the face of danger, ridicule evil, and in doing so, express a profound spiritual truth. Enduring is holy, and joy is a form of defiance. In the misty hills and in the forested valleys of ancient Ireland, the start of August signaled a sacred and deeply communal celebration. Lughnasadh, pronounced Lughnasadh, was the Celtic festival dedicated to Lugh, the god of light, skilled crafts, and battle. Unlike the grand temple ceremonies of Rome or Egypt, Lughnasadh took place outdoors, on hilltops, open fields, and near holy wells. It was not about imperial grandeur, but about the connection to the land, the harvest, and the delicate pact between humanity and nature. Lugh, the festival's namesake, represented a radiant warrior and a master of many skills. However, Lughnasadh was more than solely honoring him. Myth tells that Lugh organized the first celebration to pay tribute to his foster mother, Tile II, who died from exhaustion after clearing Ireland's plains to prepare them for farming. In her memory, people gathered to express gratitude for the initial grain harvest and to promise the earth's continued generosity. The festivities began with cutting the first bundle of grain, followed by offerings to the gods and spirits of the earth. This act was not merely symbolic, for a poor harvest meant a harsh winter. Thankfulness and ritual served as spiritual protection. Lughnasadh was also a lively social event. People traveled many miles to join fairs, markets, contests, and sports. Known as the Tailtan Games, these competitions were a mystical forerunner of the modern Olympics. Events included running, wrestling, and other athletic challenges that bonded communities in celebration. Wrestling, horse racing, and even displays of poetry and storytelling were central to the festivities. It was also a notable time for trial marriages. Couples could enter a contract lasting 1 year and 1 day. If it failed, they could separate simply by standing back to back and walking away in opposite directions. Interestingly, the gods seemed to accept such agreements without objection. The celebrations included bonfires, feasting, and dancing on consecrated hills. Yet beneath the lively competition lay a sober recognition that nature both gives generously and demands in return. Lugnasad was a dual occasion, a festival and a caution. It was a moment to enjoy the first harvest while also preparing mentally for the season of scarcity. In a cycle ruled by the changing seasons, this event signified the transition from light towards darkness. The wheat was gathered, but the shadow of winter was already looming. In the core of the Indian subcontinent, as winter fades and spring arrives, communities burst into a vibrant display of color, music, and fire. The atmosphere is loud, untamed, and sacred. This is Holi, one of the most exuberant and meaningful celebrations in ancient Hindu culture. Today, it is famous for its clouds of colored powder and spirited water fights, yet its significance runs deeper with strong religious and mythological foundations. At its essence, Holi honors the triumph of good over evil, the welcoming of spring, and the symbolic destruction of the old to allow renewal and growth. The festival kicks off on the night before the main celebration with Holika Dahan, a ritual bonfire. Its story traces back to the legend of Prahalada, a devoted worshipper setting the spiritual mood for what follows. This story involves the god Vishnu and his demon father, Hiranyakashipu, who demanded to be worshipped instead. When Prahlada refused to obey, his father plotted to kill him by placing him on the lap of his sister Holika, who was said to be immune to fire. However, fate had different plans. Holika caught fire and burned while Prahlada survived without harm. Every year, Holika's effigy is set ablaze in bonfires all over India. The flames represent the destruction of ego, hatred, and evil, symbolizing the purification of the soul through light and heat. Then comes the burst of color. The following morning, the streets transform into a vibrant mosaic. People throw gulal, bright-colored powders, at one another, drench friends with colored water, and dance joyfully to the rhythm of drums and flutes. It is impossible to stay clean or serious. Yet this joyful disorder is sacred. Social barriers disappear. The wealthy and the poor, the old and the young, men and women all become equal beneath layers of red, green, blue, and yellow. Enemies find peace, strangers become friends. For one day the world is transformed into something unrecognizable and beautifully different. Holi also ties to the tale of Krishna and Radha, where Krishna, self-conscious about his dark complexion, playfully applied color to Radha's fair face. Their divine love turned into an everlasting symbol of playful romance and spiritual unity. Thus, Holi is not just about fire and cleansing, it is also about flirting, joy, and affection. Beneath the celebration lies a deeper message about the cycle of seasons and the endurance of life. The soul and the profound beauty found in accepting impermanence reveal a timeless truth. After the flames subside and the vibrant hues fade from your skin, what truly endures is the message that Holi has always sought to convey. Light will return, happiness is sacred, and renewal is forever near. Amid the clamor of Roman legions and the grandeur of imperial spectacles, there was a ritual so secretive and exclusive that even the most powerful men in Rome were barred from participating. No senators, no priests, no emperors, Only women were allowed. This was the festival of Bonadea, the good goddess. Held every December at the residence of Rome's highest magistrate, the festival was deeply religious and shrouded in mystery. It paid homage to a goddess linked to fertility, healing, chastity, and the earth. However, her precise origins and roles remain unclear by intention. Everything about Bonadea was enveloped in feminine secrecy. The ceremonies were conducted by the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most revered priestesses, and attended solely by elite Roman women. Men were forbidden not only from taking part, but even from being aware of the rituals. In truth, not even male historians knew what occurred during the celebrations. Our knowledge mainly comes from scandal. In the year 62 before the Common Era, the festival sparked a major public uproar. That year, Julius Caesar, serving as Pontifex Maximus, was required to host the ceremonies in his home despite being unable to attend. His wife, Pompeia, took responsibility for organizing the women-only event. Events took an unexpected turn when a reckless nobleman named Publius Claius Pulchar disguised himself as a woman and slipped into a private ceremony, supposedly to charm Pompeia. He was discovered and faced a trial, which transformed the secret sacred ritual into a public spectacle. Despite Claius being found not guilty, likely due to bribery, Caesar ended his marriage with Pompeia, famously stating that Caesar's wife must be free from suspicion. Beyond the scandal, the Bonadea festival highlights a unique sacred environment wholly governed by women, where issues like fertility, health, family, and the natural cycles of the body took center stage in the religious experience. This was a rare moment when the strict male dominance of Rome yielded, allowing the divine feminine to quietly take charge. During the festival, myrtle wreaths were prohibited since they symbolized Venus and possibly represented sexual love. Wine was disguised as milk, and the rituals included music, incense, and offerings. It is said that even symbolic fertility rites took place, yet no man was ever allowed to witness them. Perhaps this was intentional. In a society that recorded almost everything, the most potent ceremonies were those left unwritten and unseen. Sometimes sacred matters must remain hidden, safeguarded by silence, and passed on only through whispered stories. Long before medieval fascination with transforming lead to gold, alchemy originated in the temples and tombs of ancient Egypt. However, they did not call it alchemy there. It was referred to as chemia, meaning the black art, a term not connected to. There is nothing ominous about the rich, dark earth of the Nile Valley, which the ancient Egyptians called Kemet, meaning the black land. For them, change was not merely a physical event, but a sacred process. This transformation concerned not only the material world, but also the soul itself. The Egyptians were skilled practitioners of practical chemistry, creating cosmetics, perfumes, glass, dyes, and metal blends. They mastered sophisticated embalming methods using resins, salts, and linen to preserve the body for eternity. However, these acts went beyond medical knowledge. They were rituals charged with divine purpose. Every step of mummification, every pigment mixed for painting had a cosmic significance, aiming to ready both body and soul for a new existence after death. Indeed, death was regarded as a kind of alchemical change. Just as metals are purified by fire, the soul of the deceased had to be cleansed through challenges in the realm of the dead. The Book of the Dead, filled with spells and chants, served as a spiritual roadmap for this profound transformation. At the heart of Egyptian belief stood the deity with the head of an ibis, the god of wisdom, writing, and sacred knowledge. When Greek and Egyptian cultures merged during the Hellenistic era, this god became linked with Hermes, the Greek messenger. This fusion resulted in the figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great, who was believed to be the author of the Hermetic texts. These mystical writings became the foundation of alchemy as a spiritual discipline, blending ancient wisdom and secret knowledge into a powerful tradition. The texts discuss not only physical processes, but also the spiritual oneness, highlighting the connection between the vast universe and the tiny human world. The saying, "as above, so below," perfectly captures this idea. In Egyptian alchemy, changing substances represented a deeper change of the spirit. Transforming ordinary metals into gold was a symbol for refining a flawed self into a pure existence. When later alchemists in Greece and Europe searched for the philosopher's stone or endless life, they were continuing an ancient Egyptian belief. Real change does not start in the laboratory. It begins inside one's heart. While Egypt contributed the ritualistic spirit to alchemy, ancient Persia provided it with moral purpose and a cosmic structure, grounded in the timeless battle between good and evil. At the core of the Persian Empire, long before the medieval alchemists emerged, the teachings of Zoroaster shaped a worldview where transformation was essential, not optional. His dualistic outlook divided the cosmos into two conflicting powers. Ahura Mazda represented light, truth, and order, while Angra Mainyu embodied darkness and chaos. This was more than mythology. It was a philosophical foundation that shaped alchemical thought. Zoroastrians expressed their devotion through fire, a living sign of truth and divine enlightenment. In their temples, sacred flames burned without cease. Fire cleansed, uncovered truth, and brought change. Much like an alchemist's furnace centuries later, Persians also advanced sophisticated processes. Techniques of metalworking were highly advanced in ancient Persia. They ranked among the pioneers in refining copper, silver, and gold, as well as in smelting iron and experimenting with various alloys. Their craftsmen were not merely skilled workers. They were considered initiates engaged in the refinement of nature itself. Transforming ore into gleaming metal was regarded as an act of universal harmony, turning raw and chaotic matter into something orderly and pure. Even the oldest Persian medical writings contain early traces of alchemical concepts. These texts include lists of minerals, metals, plants, and their effects on the human body. The goal was not solely to heal, but to harmonize the body with the divine order of the cosmos. Later on, Islamic scholars would preserve and build upon these Persian alchemical ideas. However, even before Islam, a powerful belief was already emerging. Matter is not fixed, and within every imperfect substance lies a potential for perfection. This very concept would inspire alchemists to transform lead into gold, or elevate the soul from a base state to a divine one. Persian philosophy presented a kind of moral alchemy, emphasizing purification not only of materials, but also of intentions. Fire was more than a tool to melt metals. It burned away illusions and uncovered hidden truths. Persian alchemists believed that within the core, where smoke met spirit, rested a divine spark capable of transforming everything, including the self. While Egypt contributed sacred rites to alchemy, Persia offered its profound philosophical foundation. The foundation of moral understanding traces back to ancient Greece, where intellectuals sought to explain existence through reason, geometry, and a hint of cosmic pride. During this period, alchemy did not disappear but transformed instead. Greek philosophers absorbed mystical and chemical knowledge from earlier cultures and aimed to rationalize it. Rather than relying on chemical experiments, they delved into philosophy. Central to Greek alchemical thought was the concept of the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Initially introduced by Empedocles, these were not merely physical materials, but fundamental building blocks shaping the universe. Transformation was seen as the constant rearrangement of these elements. For example, fire could change into air, water into earth, highlighting an ongoing flux of forms. Subsequent thinkers, such as Plato, expanded on this idea by attributing deeper significance to matter, which he believed consisted of perfect geometric shapes, tiny, invisible solids. In Plato's interpretation, alchemy transcended mere chemical alterations and became a pursuit of harmony with an ideal form of reality. Then Aristotle brought a different perspective that reshaped the entire concept. He suggested every material had 4 inherent qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. By modifying these characteristics, substances themselves could change. Lead, for instance, was understood to be dry and heavy, while gold represented balance and brilliance. Therefore, if one managed to adjust lead's qualities toward nobler traits, it could theoretically transform into gold. Does this sound recognizable? This concept of transmutation, converting one material into another, remains a fundamental notion in alchemy. The concept of transforming one substance into another became the foundation for all future developments in alchemy. However, the Greeks did not limit themselves to mere speculation. In Hellenistic Alexandria, a unique blend of Egyptian mysticism, Greek philosophy, and Babylonian astronomy merged, giving rise to alchemy as an actual practice. This city served as a laboratory not only for experimenting with physical elements, but also for cultivating ideas. Scholars and mystics documented some of the earliest formulas for dyes, fragrances, and metal mixtures, though these were always expressed in symbolic and enigmatic terms. It was in this vibrant atmosphere that the legendary figure Hermes Trismegistus appeared, a fusion of the Egyptian deity Thoth and the Greek god Hermes. He was attributed with authoring the Hermetic writings, which taught the purification of not only materials, but also the soul. These texts encouraged followers to pursue union with the divine through profound internal change. For the Greeks, alchemy was never about financial gain. It represented a quest to comprehend nature, reflect the cosmos, and elevate the self by uncovering the hidden laws that govern reality. This pursuit elevated alchemy beyond mere science into a realm dangerously close to sacred power. Alexandria, a thriving port city established by Alexander the Great and governed by the Ptolemies, became the true center where alchemy flourished. Greek logic, Egyptian ritualistic traditions, Babylonian star knowledge, and Persian philosophical ideas came together in a rich intellectual fusion. At the core of this dynamic culture stood the great library of Alexandria, renowned for amassing vast knowledge and attracting scholars from all over the ancient world. Within this fertile environment, alchemy did more than endure. It blossomed into a profound discipline that shaped the course of later science and spirituality. Alchemy evolved into something both spiritual and practical, mystical yet experimental. Egyptian temple rituals combined with Greek natural philosophy. Babylonian star charts were examined alongside Greek medical knowledge and Egyptian metalworking. This fusion created a novel type of understanding, part science, part sacred practice. One of the earliest and most enigmatic figures in Alexandrian alchemy was Mary the Jewess. She is credited with inventing some of the first alchemical tools, such as the bain-marie, a double boiler still widely used in kitchens today, the tribicos, a distillation apparatus, and a system for vapor purification. Her achievements indicate that alchemists were not mere theorists. They engaged in genuine chemical experimentation. Another prominent personality was Zosimos of Panopolis, an alchemist from the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Common Era, who left some of the earliest Greek writings on alchemy. Zosimos perceived alchemy as far more than a physical craft. He wrote about dreams, visions, and the process of spiritual cleansing. For him, transforming lead into gold symbolized the transmutation of the flawed human soul into something divine. He depicted the alchemical vessel not only as a container for substances, but as a metaphor for the human body, the fire within, the soul's inner struggle, and the vapor as the divine spirit rising. His works blurred the boundaries between chemistry and mysticism, between material reality and symbolic meaning. Alchemists from Alexandria also strongly embraced Hermeticism, the teachings associated with Hermes Trismegistus. They expressed the principle, as above, so below, reflecting the unity of heaven and earth. The tiny world mirrors the vast universe. Cleanse one, and you affect the other. In Alexandria, alchemy evolved beyond mere substances. It became a quest to understand reality itself. It did not only question what elements formed things, but also why they could transform and if the soul might change alongside physical matter. Alchemy turned into a reflection of the universe and our inner selves. And this journey was only beginning. When the great library of Alexandria was destroyed and Europe descended into the early medieval period, the torch of alchemical wisdom passed to the Islamic realm. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, during the Abbasid Caliphate, the Islamic Golden Age made cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba flourishing hubs of science and philosophy. Texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions were rapidly translated into Arabic. Among these were the essential alchemical works. But the story takes a fascinating turn. Islamic thinkers did not simply conserve ancient alchemy, they reinvented it. Introducing Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in Europe as Geber. A versatile scholar of 8th century Kufa, he is often hailed as the founder of chemistry, though much about him remains enigmatic. His extensive writings, numbering in the hundreds, combined Greek theories of elements with Persian spiritual beliefs and Quranic views of the cosmos into a coherent scientific system. He pioneered a methodical way of conducting experiments. Jabir proposed that all metals consisted of sulfur and mercury, offering a fresh framework for understanding material transformations, not in the strict material sense, but as symbolic principles. Sulfur symbolized fire and transformation, while mercury represented fluidity and unpredictability. Jabir argued that by harmonizing these two elements, one could transform one metal into another. He also pioneered methods that remain familiar today, including distillation, crystallization, sublimation, filtration, and calcination. His devices laid the groundwork for the design of medieval chemistry labs. However, Islamic alchemy was more than just technical skill. It preserved the spiritual essence of earlier teachings. The process of alchemy was perceived as a journey toward divine insight. The alteration of physical substances served as an allegory for cleansing the soul and bringing it into harmony with the divine order of the cosmos. Subsequent alchemists, such as Al-Razi, Razis, and Avicenna, debated the validity of alchemy. Al-Razi was a proponent, highlighting its valuable medical uses. Avicenna, in contrast, questioned the possibility of transmutation, though he appreciated alchemy's philosophical and ethical objectives. Despite their disagreements, these thinkers elevated alchemy beyond a secretive art. It emerged as a combination of early chemistry, metaphysics, spiritual practice, and moral philosophy. Later, European intellectuals rediscovered these Arabic manuscripts, translated them into Latin, and revived alchemy in Western Europe. Yet the core of alchemy, the conviction that the physical world and the spiritual realm reflect one another, was maintained, refined, and organized by Muslim scholars. In their care, this legacy flourished. Alchemy shifted from myth to a budding science when the translated texts of Arabic alchemists, such as Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Razi, and Avicii, reached Europe during the 12th century. An extraordinary revival of alchemical practice took place. Under the shadowed stone towers of medieval monasteries and universities, Europe had been in a state of intellectual dormancy. However, with the emergence of translation centers in cities like Toledo and Sicily, Latin-speaking scholars obtained access to a vast collection of ancient knowledge. Among these were alchemical manuscripts filled with cryptic symbols, enigmatic substances, and promises of transformation. The Europeans became deeply fascinated. Alchemy represented more than simply the pursuit of gold. It offered the potential for knowledge, extraordinary power, and even everlasting life. The mysterious philosopher's stone emerged as the ultimate goal, believed to convert common metals to gold and grant immortality. Yet, it was more than just a physical object, it embodied the perfect union of matter and spirit. Medieval alchemists embraced this dual significance seriously. Renowned figures, including Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon, were both monks and pioneering experimental scientists. They believed that God had inscribed the secrets of creation within the natural world, and alchemy provided a way to decipher this divine code. For these scholars, alchemy was no form of witchcraft, but a Christian natural philosophy, a method to comprehend divine order through the change of substances. Laboratories evolved into monastic cloisters of discovery. Fire and glass, retorts, Olympic contests, crucibles, and furnaces filled with materials such as sulfur, mercury, antimony, and lead. Trials were documented in encrypted manuscripts rich with allegory and symbolism. This tradition made alchemy seem mysterious and difficult to understand. However, beneath the enigmatic language, genuine scientific endeavors were underway. Among the most significant figures of this era was Pseudo-Geber, an enigmatic Latin author who transformed Arabic texts into European editions. His writings became fundamental guides for subsequent alchemists. Another prominent individual was Arnold of Villanova, who blurred the boundaries between medicine and alchemy, concentrating on producing elixirs claimed to heal and restore youth. Despite the secrecy surrounding it, medieval alchemy was not clandestine. It was a subject of academic debate, funded by nobility and practiced by clergy. Yet, despite its spiritual goals, many practitioners still sought gold, sometimes in a literal sense, other times as a metaphor. Thus, medieval Europe sustained the spark of transformation, combining faith, fire, and a philosophical vision. As Europe transitioned from the medieval period to the Renaissance, alchemy did not disappear. It evolved, becoming more secretive, symbolic, and oddly more mystical. From the blend of Hermetic philosophy, Christian mysticism, and Renaissance humanism arose one of the most intriguing movements in alchemical history, the Rosicrucians. In the early 17th century, anonymous manifestos started to circulate. Across the continent of Europe, the story unfolds through texts like Farmer, Fraternitatis, Confessatio Fraternitatis, and The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. These writings narrated the legend of a secret brotherhood known as the Rosy Cross Fraternity, supposedly founded by a legendary figure called Christian Rosenkreutz. He was said to have traveled through the East, acquiring hidden knowledge before returning to Europe to discreetly guide those seeking spiritual enlightenment. However, here is the surprising fact. There is no proof that the Rosicrucians ever existed as a real group, at least initially. They were more of a concept and a symbol whose impact resonated deeply. Rosicrucian alchemy was never truly about turning base metals into gold, but about spiritual illumination. It fused the process of alchemical change with Christian mystical teachings, interpreting the cleansing of metals as an allegory for purifying the human soul. The philosopher's stone became a powerful emblem representing Christ consciousness, inner renewal, and unity with the divine. Their declarations heralded a transformation in science, religion, and governance, a clandestine spiritual revolution that would usher humanity into a new era of enlightenment. Yet they provided no physical locations, no individual leaders, only emblems like the rose, which symbolized secrecy and beauty, and the cross, symbolizing sacrifice and change. This form of alchemy was a spiritual metaphor filled with deep symbolism and hidden meanings. The Rosicrucians believed that the truth remained concealed not because it was forbidden, but because it required personal inner growth to be discovered. Their philosophies left a lasting mark, inspiring mystical and esoteric traditions that followed. Scholars, mystics, creators, and poets all engaged with these ideas. Isaac Newton possessed Rosicrucian manuscripts. Johann Valentine Andrea, believed to have authored The Chemical Wedding, viewed the tale as symbolic. Nevertheless, it spread rapidly within occult circles. By this time, alchemy had gained multiple layers of interpretation. For some, it remained concerned with physical substances. For others, it served purely as metaphor. For the Rosicrucians, it represented a spiritual journey concealed in everyday reality. Although their brotherhood might have been legendary, their impact was genuine, resonating across centuries with the message that true gold lies within. As the 17th century progressed, alchemy began intersecting with the unexpected realm of contemporary science. This transition was not abrupt. The boundary between alchemist and chemist was indistinct, and numerous pioneers of the scientific method were still in pursuit of the philosopher's stone. One of the most renowned examples is Isaac Newton. Yes, the very same individual who developed the laws of motion and universal gravitation devoted more time to studying alchemy than physics in his lifetime. Privately, Newton filled his notebooks with mysterious experiments, scrutinized ancient symbols, and sought to reveal the divine workings of the cosmos. To him, the universe functioned as a sacred mechanism, and alchemy was a fiery golden code to decode it. Newton was not unique in this approach. Robert Boyle, often regarded as the founder of modern chemistry, was also deeply influenced by alchemical ideas. His notable work from 1661, the book The Skeptical Chemist, questioned the traditional theory of 4 elements and established the foundation for chemical examination. However, Boyle also accepted the idea of metal transformation and regarded alchemy as a legitimate area of study. So what shifted? The main change was in approach. Alchemy had long been enveloped in symbolism, secrecy, and spiritual allegory. Yet emerging researchers began to insist on transparency, reproducibility, and proof. They began to abandon the mystical vocabulary in favor of measurable outcomes. The laboratory, once a realm full of mysterious wonders, transformed into a domain of precise reactions and accurate instruments. Tools from alchemy like crucibles, furnaces, and other devices evolved into fundamental equipment in contemporary chemistry. The aspiration to convert lead into gold diminished, replaced by the practical goal of comprehending the fundamental components of matter. Still, the alchemical perspective did not completely vanish. The idea that matter can change, that complex systems hold hidden structures, and that humans can influence nature through profound insight persisted. These alchemical concepts quietly survived, now appearing in lab coats rather than robes. By the 18th century, alchemy was mostly written off as pseudoscience. Yet history is rarely simple. The reality is, modern science grew from the foundations of alchemy. The alchemists, with all their strange signs and impossible hopes, did more than just experiment with metals. They confronted the core questions. The question, is it possible to change the world, continues to fuel scientific inquiry, even today. By the 19th century, alchemy appeared to have disappeared completely, dismissed by logical thinkers as a charming remnant of outdated superstitions. Yet, like mercury in a vessel, its spirit never fully vanished. Instead, alchemy transformed itself, finding fresh expressions in psychology, literature, art, and contemporary spiritual teachings. One of the most unexpected bearers of alchemical ideas was Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. For Jung, alchemy was not concerned with literal transformation of metals. Rather, it served as a symbolic representation of the human mind. He pored over alchemical writings, identifying in their mysterious images and metaphors a language of the unconscious mind. The philosopher's stone stood as a metaphor for achieving one's true potential. The alchemical stages such as calcination, dissolution, fermentation, and coagulation reflected the psychological process of individuation, the merging of all parts of a person's identity. According to Jung, alchemy was the earliest form of therapy, a coded spiritual practice disguised as primitive chemistry. Its true purpose was not to produce gold, but to heal the inner self. In this way, alchemy has never ceased adapting. In literature, it remains alive through masterpieces like Faust, The Alchemist, and numerous fantasy tales where secret wisdom, transformation, and salvation play key roles. In today's spiritual circles, alchemy is a powerful symbol of personal evolution, the belief that life's hardships, when refined, can lead to growth and enlightenment. Wisdom and completeness can emerge even in science, where remnants of old dreams persist. The age-old ambition of alchemy to comprehend and control the transformation of substances finds a fascinating parallel in nuclear physics, where elements truly undergo change. Although alchemists misunderstood the mechanisms, they were not mistaken about the possibility of transformation. On a cultural level, we continue to pursue alchemical ideals, such as the quest for healing remedies and the desire for immortal youth. Our attraction to the mysterious, the symbolic, and the transformative power of alchemy lies not in its failed formulas, but in its creative vision and belief that the world is changeable. It holds that what is base can rise to nobility, and that knowledge applied wisely can uplift both matter and spirit. Alchemy never disappeared. It evolved. It transformed into chemistry, psychology, storytelling, and metaphor. In a sense, it became part of you. Every challenge you face, every experience that refines you and helps you grow stronger, is your own personal alchemy, not in making gold, but in strengthening your spirit. This was always the true enchantment,